Hello, fellow birders. My name is Dennis Kania. Today we're going to talk about how to point out a bird to other birders that are next to you. On the DuPage Birding Club Education channel, we'll be discussing all things bird related. And as I mentioned, today we'll be talking about how to point out a bird to your fellow birders. So let's cover a few basics. First of all, don't point. This action can actually be very unnerving to birds. So you don't want to be pointing that in the direction of the bird because quite often you'll end up chasing the bird out of the area that it's located in, and all your fellow birders are never going to get to see that bird. So rule number one is don't point. Another thing that I find people often say in the field is that the bird is straight ahead of us. And depending on where you're looking, straight ahead can be very different than the person who's calling out the bird. In this image here, you can see that there's 4 birders and they're all looking in different directions. So straight ahead ends up not being very helpful. It's about as helpful as saying the bird is in a green tree. And we need to build on that so we have some other skills. I think most birders have been exposed to the concept of looking at a tree and thinking of it as a face of a clock, where 12 o'clock is at the top of the tree and 3 o'clock is out over here, 6 o'clock here, 9 o'clock here, and so on. So quite often birds aren't on the perimeter. So you might end up saying something like the bird is at 1 o'clock, but in about 5 feet. So give them that added information that tells them they're not looking at the perimeter, but actually coming in towards the center from the 1 o'clock position, or from the 3 o'clock position, or the 5 o'clock position, depending on what area you're trying to get your other birders to focus on. Another phrase that I quite frequently hear is that the bird is in a V or next to a V. And often you'll find trees that are just full of V's. And so in this example here, you can see there's just V's all over the place. Same goes for this tree as well. I can see there's a V here and one here. There's a larger one here and even a larger one here. So it's very important to make sure that everybody's focusing on the right V. In order to do that, we have to kind of refine what we're trying to say to people. And so we will take things just a little bit further. One of the first steps that you can take is to make sure that everybody has a common starting point when they're trying to locate the bird that you're describing. And in some cases, it can be very, very easy. In this example here, you can see that there are some brown leaves. If you can get everybody to focus on those brown leaves, that's our starting point. And everybody is starting from the same position. So you don't have to worry about they're looking in the wrong V of the tree or not looking straight ahead. So once you have them on that mark, then if you need to make them look further to the left or further to the right or up or down, you can move them in that direction. And sometimes you can actually take them from one obvious central point to a secondary point, and you can move more quickly that way. So if I was on these brown leaves and I said, well, look for the bright spot above that where the sun is hitting the tree, and we would get people to move into this spot. And then from there, maybe we're much closer, and then we can say, 2 feet above that spot or 2 feet to the right of that spot. Same thing in this example here. Let's say I'm trying to get people onto a bird that's right here. And if I said, well, it's on the right side of that bush, there's a bush here, there's a bush here, there's a bush here, and there's a bush here. And even if I say, well, it's that higher bush, or if I say that it's the one over here to the right or something, that's still not going to get us to the right position, or at least it's not going to guarantee that. So what I would do in this example is I would say, well, see the tree snag that's very, very light in color, that's chopped off. And so everybody's going to be looking at this tree right here. And then I would say, well, there's a bush behind that, and then there is one to the right, and it's to the right-hand side of that bush. And so now we have some directions that get people to the right place. And everyone is starting from that common starting point. So that's one of the easiest things you can do to get people started in the right direction. And after giving those directions, if people still aren't finding that bird, you try and go through the same set of directions all over again. And if it still isn't working, then obviously this common starting point is not working for everyone. So you may have to find another starting point. but make sure that they're actually listening to you. And that's why you need to go through it a couple times. I've had occasions where people just I say, do you see this tree here? And they say yes. And then I move on to the next thing. And do you see this? Yes. And sometimes people will just say yes for the sake of saying yes. They don't want to embarrass themselves or embarrass you. So they just kind of go along with the flow, and they're never going to find the bird with that kind of approach. So make sure that they are understanding where your starting point is. Sometimes it can be useful to use something in the foreground to help point a tree further in the background where the bird is located. And in this example here, we have another dead tree with a bunch of vines on it, but there are these branches coming up. And let's say that this branch in particular is going to be helpful in getting people to look at this particular tree, to try and describe where that tree is in this general canopy. It might be difficult to get that tree pinpointed. So it might be useful to actually have a pointer like this. And it might not end up being a nice branch like this. It could be just a tip of a small tree right in front of you, and you say you want to have people looking behind that or to the right of that or to the left. But just keep in mind that you can use something in the foreground. And this will only work if people are aligned with you and they have the same perspective on the scene that you have. So before you say something like that, you might have to say that people should line up over your left shoulder or over your right shoulder. And that way they're pretty close to having the same view that you are having. On occasion, it can be useful to actually use something that's on the horizon or way in the background as your pointer. So let's say we're trying to get people to look at a small duck that's right in this part of the pond here. Now, there's many different ways you could go about doing that. You could say, look for the dark area in the pond, and some people might be able to pick up that fact that there is this little darker area. And you could say then it's a little bit to the right of that. But some people aren't going to find that. So there's a couple things that we have in the background here that I would utilize. Let's say that the bird is more in this general area here. I would say that you see the white trunk in the background that kind of forms a tight X, or crisscross, the trunks crisscross or something like that. So anyway, get people looking at this particular trunk here, and then say that you come forward from that point into the pond, past the lily pads that are in the back. And now you've got them into at least the general plane of where you want people to look. You could also say, do you see the large gap in the tree line behind the pond? There's a electric pole back there. And so, come forward from that. And that's if you're trying to get them to look at something in just this general area here. And you can also use other features, like you can see there's an island here with a little shrub on it. And you can maybe use the point of this little peninsula coming off of it and use that as a pointer to something maybe in this general area. So there's lots of different ways that you can go about pointing people in the right direction. And what you have to do is assess what you have available to you, and then pick the best thing that most people are going to recognize, or the thing that's most obvious to the most people in your group. Another thing that you might use as a little trick is to use lines of delineation. In this case, we have this very strong line of this bright set of leaves, and then you have this dark background. And let's say you're trying to get people to see something in this dark background. You can say it's to the left of this, and maybe at eye level or just above eye level. And that's a pretty extreme situation, but you can also see that even in the background here, you do have different colors. And so, that line of delineation is here or it's here, but you get people to start out by looking at that bright part and then say, on the lower edge of that, look just below and about 2 feet down and 1 foot to the right or left. And you draw people into that proper area. So it's another creative way of getting people to look into a certain section by using delineations in color or brightness. Sometimes you're looking at an area that just seems very, very monotonous or uniform in pattern. The example of all these black locust trunks here, trying to get people to look at something in a particular area can be very difficult because everything here pretty much looks the same. So you have to find a couple of unique features. In this case, there is a locust tree that does have a split trunk here. And so or you might say it's a very, very tight V, where most of these trunks are all very, very uniform, just singular. So that could be your starting point, or it could be this one over here. If you want to get to something closer in this area, here's one that has, sunlight dappling on it. And so that makes that one stand out. So you find a feature within the monotony that just stands out a little bit. And that can be tricky sometimes if you're looking at a grassy field or maybe the edge of a wetland where it's all cattails. So then you might have to use some other features like we talked about before, things in the background or in the foreground. In this case here, there's a couple of features that you could utilize to get people started out in the right place. One of them being this sunlit trunk here. Another one might be this diagonal black trunk here. But getting those people onto those starting points and then directing them from that point to the bird is probably an easy enough thing to do. Sometimes you do end up in these areas where just everything's very, very plain. In this field here, we do have some grasses growing, and then it's edged in goldenrod. So let's say the bird is somewhere in this general area here. We would use those delineations in color and say that, well, you can see the goldenrod in the back and you can see goldenrod in the front. And we're going to split the difference between those two. So that maybe puts you in this general area here. If you need to be further back than that, then you say it's closer to the back edge. And then in combination with these linear delineations, you can also then use something in the background to kind of get them squared away to be looking in this area here. You can say, see the area with two trunks in the back, come forward past the goldenrod until you get about halfway across the grass area, which would put us right about here. In a situation like this, you would think it might be difficult to, for people not to see the bird, but let's say there's a flock of birds out here and you wanted to get them on one specific one. Let's say there's half a dozen white-crowned sparrows out here, and there is one Harris's sparrow amongst them. So fortunately, this area has been mowed, but it gives us, again, lines of delineation. You can see a line here and here and here, the tire tracks, right? You can use that in combination with the shadow lines. And so now you've got two sets of delineation to work with. So let's say the bird is somewhere in this general area here. And you could say that starting out with this tree, you want observers to move and view an area that is just to the right of the third tire track. So here's 1, 2, 3. So now you've kind of got them in this general area here. And then you can talk about the fact that you have shadows going across. You have a close shadow and then sunlight and then a dark shadow again. And on the back side of that second set of shadows, that's the area that the Harris's sparrow is in. So now you've got them right into exactly the spot that you would like them to be in. So there's many, many different ways that you can go about doing this. The point of all of this is that you can be very creative with the things that are around you. And the second point is that you need to find some common starting point. That's the best way to get everybody onto a bird. Make sure it's something obvious, because to say that it's straight ahead or to say, look at the V, or some other feature that maybe is replicated someplace else in the tree canopy or in the field or wherever you're looking, people are going to pick the wrong starting point. So you want to make sure you pick something out, and there's many different ways to go about doing it. We've gone through quite a few examples here. So hopefully this will help you out in the future, and you'll be able to describe where birds are much more easily with your birding friends. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. Hopefully we've given you some bird food for thought, and I hope you'll join us again in the future as we explore all things bird related.